Wake up, get dressed, smile at someone, say you're fine. Do what needs to be done. On the outside, everything seems in order, but there's a weight, a tiredness that has no name or shape, only presence. Something that silently follows you, like a shadow shaped by your own routine. You go to work, take part in conversations, even laugh at some jokes, but something inside remains still. A kind of boredom that never goes away. A sadness that doesn't explode, but also never leaves. An absence of purpose disguised as productivity. This unease, this dissonant feeling that seems to live deep in your soul, doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's learned, shaped, slowly fed until it becomes part of your inner furniture. It's the emptiness of someone who tried to fit in for so long, they forgot who they were. On the outside, everything looks in place. The house, the body, the commitments. But inside, there's a fog. And the worst part is realizing that this fog has become your normal. You've learned to perform your life as if there's an invisible script dictating who you should be, how you should act, what you should feel. And this script, handed down, never chosen, silences the essential parts of who you are. In the beginning, the pain still showed up with force. Breakdowns, tears, the urge to disappear. But over time, it was tamed, and it became routine. You're not falling apart, but you're not okay either. You live in a suffocating middle ground, a fatigue that sleep can't fix, an irritation with no cause, an unease just being with yourself. And all of this is swept under the emotional rug, because there's always something urgent that needs to get done, an obligation, a task, a reason to keep going. It's not just the routine that consumes you, it's the belief that this way of living is normal, that everyone feels this way, that the problem is you not knowing how to handle it. So you pretend, you endure, and you keep demanding more of yourself. This silent sadness, now absorbed into your identity, isn't just a symptom, it's a sign, not of weakness, but of a deep misalignment between what you're living and who you truly are. The problem isn't what's wrong with you, but everything you were forced to swallow just to function in a world that never taught you how to feel. This invisible weight has a name, but not the clinical kind people try to label it with. It has a name in the language of the soul. And if there's enough silence to hear it, it becomes clear. This isn't a disease. It's a calling. The first of many. The deepest pain rarely screams. It settles in silence, digs inward, disguises itself as apathy. No one notices. Sometimes not even you. You just feel it. A constant discomfort, like something is off, but you don't know what. And over time, giving that pain a name becomes harder and harder. You could call it depression. Many do. But maybe what's happening goes beyond any diagnosis. There's a war going on inside. A clash between what you feel and what you wish you felt. Between what you think and what you were taught to think. Between who you are and who you learned to pretend to be. Schopenhauer once said that suffering isn't a mistake or a detour. It's the very condition of existence. And that phrase makes sense even to those who've never read a single line of his work. Because this inner struggle isn't theoretical, it's lived. It happens when we try to adapt to a world that ignores our pain. When we suffocate our desires to fit into expectations that were never ours to begin with. At some point, you become the battlefield. The war isn't out there. It stares back at you in the mirror. On some days, you're the attacker. On others, the victim of your own self-criticism. And most of the time you're both, the one who demands and the one who fails. This war doesn't use words. It hides in the subtext, in the silences, in the thoughts you don't share. It lives in the insomnia, in the unexplained irritability, in the short answers, in the moments when your heart feels heavier than your body. And even so, you keep trying to act like nothing's happening. But it is. It's happening inside you, all the time. You were taught how to handle the outside world, but no one taught you how to face the conflict raging inside. The truth is, there was never room to learn how to deal with your own pain. And that's why it grew. That's why you're still fighting. That's why there's now this quiet exhaustion. But if there's a war, there's also a possibility of change. And it begins with the awareness that this pain isn't random. It doesn't invade, it inhabits. And anything that inhabits can be understood. and anything understood can be transformed. Not through magic formulas, but through clarity and courage. Internal criticism repeats itself every day. Constant comparisons, silent expectations, absurd demands. And the scariest part, it all feels normal. It even feels necessary. But there's a huge difference between growth and self-harm. And what's been happening to you isn't growth. It's self-violence dressed up as responsibility. Most of the pain didn't come from the outside. It was born from the ideas you were taught to nurture on the inside. There were so many voices telling you that you weren't enough, that you needed to try harder, that you should stay quiet, stay in control, stay in line. Over time, those voices stopped being external. They became your own thoughts. And now they're repeated so often that they sound like truth. Attempts are abandoned before they even begin, out of fear of failure. Choices are made based on what seems safest, not what actually makes sense. There's an exhausting effort to be approved of, even when no one is demanding it. Schopenhauer spoke of this blind will that drags us forward, even when everything inside us begs for relief. And maybe that's what's been happening. A quiet repetition of self-sabotage that seems rational, but only serves to maintain a pattern of suffering. There's control, hypervigilance, self-censorship. And every time the possibility of breaking free from this cycle arises, so do the justifications. This isn't the right time. This just isn't for me. But the truth, hard as it is to admit, is that the suffering continues not because of conscious choice, but because of fear of change. The cruelty of self-sabotage lies exactly in that. It looks logical. It looks like caution. But what it really does is block life from flowing with ease. And that's not protection. It's self-abandonment. Acknowledging this is hard, but it's liberating. Because when pain is seen clearly, it begins to lose the power it once held in silence. The truth is, many of the so-called virtues you carry today were born from pain. So many criticisms made silence feel like protection. So many moments of invisibility turned perfectionism into a way to be noticed. So much rejection led you to hide parts of yourself. And now, living behind those masks has become so automatic, you can't even tell where the protection ends and the prison begins. Fear, in itself, isn't the enemy, but it needs to be recognized. Because as long as it remains disguised as caution, reason, or virtue, it will keep stealing your freedom. And the cruelest part is that you'll still feel grateful for it. This sadness that's settled in has already become part of your routine. It's not intense, it's not loud, but it's constant. You wake up and go to sleep with it, have coffee with it, and sometimes you barely notice it's there, because it stopped hurting and simply became familiar. But it wasn't always this way. At first, it bothered you. Then it settled in. The guilt, the silence, the sense of not belonging all became normal. The suffering, no longer new, now hides more easily. And that's what makes it so dangerous. There are no screams, no explosions. Life goes on. You meet your commitments, you have conversations, you offer smiles. But even on the lightest of days, something remains heavy. A nameless emptiness. A discomfort no distraction can erase. This pain didn't come out of nowhere. It was built, little by little. Every time tears were held back, anger was swallowed, boundaries were ignored. Every forced smile, every attempt to keep the peace at the cost of your own well-being. Schopenhauer didn't see suffering as a mistake, but as an inevitable part of the human condition. Still, what you're feeling goes beyond that condition. It's the result of a constant effort to adapt. An effort so intense, exhaustion became your natural state. When pain becomes too familiar, it loses its alarm. It stops being a signal, and it turns into scenery. The risk is believing that this is just who you are, when in truth, it's just a reflection of everything you were forced to swallow. But it's not your essence. It's a consequence. And what is a consequence can be undone. The first step is exactly that. Stop treating pain as part of your identity. It doesn't define who you are. It only shows how much you've had to endure just to keep going. From a young age, you were taught that praising yourself was vanity, that trusting yourself was arrogance, that putting yourself first was selfishness. And now, so many of these beliefs operate automatically, without you even noticing. The problem is, this kind of emotional conditioning quietly installed a pattern of self-punishment. Making a mistake became shameful. Resting feels like laziness. Celebrating success brings guilt. And when something goes wrong, your immediate reaction is to blame yourself, even when there's no clear reason. Schopenhauer said suffering is inevitable, but what you're living goes beyond that. It's as if suffering were a permanent debt, a price to pay simply for existing. Even when no one is actually demanding anything, the pressure continues, internally. There's effort, control, discipline. Even in exhaustion, the body keeps going. Even when everything inside begs for rest, rigidity wins. And when you finally find the courage to ask for help, it comes hand in hand with the feeling of failure. Because you were taught that feeling is weakness, and enduring is strength. But the strength that gets so glorified is often just a silent form of abandonment. The responsibility that seems noble hides the neglect of self. Caring for others turns into carelessness toward yourself. And over time, this inversion leaves deep marks. The saddest part is having learned to distrust kindness. When someone is gentle, it feels strange. When something good happens, you brace for disaster. Because harshness became so constant that gentleness started to feel like a lie. This self-punishment became a habit. And like any habit, it can be broken. The beginning lies in recognizing that there is another way to live. That it's possible to be strong without hurting yourself. That it's possible to grow without breaking. Despite everything, there's still a part of you that remains. Small, quiet, but alive. The part that still believes, even if secretly. That still wants, even if fearfully. That still dreams, even without knowing how to make those dreams real. This part is uncomfortable, because it reveals that something isn't right. That something inside you wants to change. That spark hasn't gone out. And as long as it still exists, there is possibility. Schopenhauer found meaning in facing pain, not in fleeing from it. And maybe that's what this part of you is trying to say. That there's wisdom in listening to what you most try to avoid. Pain is sometimes just the body asking for a break. Other times, it's the soul asking to be heard. Maybe that's what this discomfort has been trying to show you for years. That you deserve more than what you've been accepting. That this life isn't the only one possible. You don't need to know the entire path. You only need to recognize the desire for another one. That's where transformation begins. With the simple but powerful act of admitting that something within you still wants to live differently. And that's already enough not to give up. Even when you're tired, even when you have no certainty, even when you feel like you have no strength. Because as long as that spark of life remains, there is a beginning. And where there is a beginning, there is a way out. Even the deepest pain, when listened to with honesty, can stop being a prison. It's cruel, because it offers immediate relief. It gives permission to stop, to ease the pressure, to rest for a while. And sometimes that's necessary. But when that relief becomes a habit, it traps you, keeps you exactly where you most want to leave. Suffering becomes an excuse. Opportunities are pushed away, gestures are held back, possibilities are abandoned, all to avoid facing a pain that, over time, began to feel like identity. Schopenhauer saw suffering as inevitable, but also believed that awareness was the only way to deal with it. And awareness here means recognizing when pain stopped being a burden and became a shield. Healthy self-compassion welcomes, embraces, strengthens. But its distorted version paralyzes. It makes you believe the world owes you something. That after everything you've felt, you shouldn't have to try anymore. It's not about blame. It's about noticing when pain became a safe place. Because it exempts you from the responsibility of trying again. Because it protects you from the risk of getting hurt again. And sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is to stop hiding behind pain and begin, without guarantees, even with fear. Little by little, you get used to what you feel. To the heaviness, the anxiety, the constant sensation of always owing something. That doesn't mean you're okay. It just means you've adapted. The body learned to function under tension. The mind, to think under pressure. And the heart, to beat without hope. That's the real danger of the comfort zone. It's not comfortable, just familiar. It's familiar even when it hurts. There's a predictable logic in repeated suffering, a pattern that gives a sense of control. And that, paradoxically, feels calming. Even so, the cost is high. Draining relationships, numbing routines, sabotaging thoughts, all maintained to avoid the unknown. Because facing the new demands something many people avoid, taking responsibility for their own freedom. Schopenhauer believed that human beings fear that freedom for this exact reason. When you choose to step out of the cycle, you can't blame others anymore. You have to look at yourself with honesty. Staying also comes at a cost. A kind of wear and tear that isn't immediately visible but slowly corrodes you. That's why, even in silence, something inside you is screaming. It's that discomfort without a name, but it insists. That quiet dissatisfaction that keeps trying to wake you up. The comfort zone doesn't destroy you all at once. It slowly drains you. It dims dreams, dims desires, until all that's left is someone who survives, but no longer lives. You don't need strength to change everything at once. You just need to admit that where you are is already hurting, and that staying still out of fear isn't protecting you anymore. It's consuming you. The mind begins to tell stories, repetitions that become certainties. This is just how I am. It's always been hard. If it doesn't hurt, it's not worth anything. And the more you repeat it, the more true it seems. Suffering stops being something that happens and becomes who you are. And when that happens, even lightness feels like a mistake. You've spent so long being the one who endures, who survives, who doesn't fall apart, that when something good finally happens, you feel like you don't belong, like you don't deserve to feel good. That's the trap. Pain gives structure, and you grow used to existing through resistance. But there comes a moment when resistance turns into attachment, and that's when something has to change. Because continuing to fight without knowing why eventually wears you down. Schopenhauer spoke of the will as a force that never stops moving us. Always seeking, always lacking. But when that will becomes fixed on suffering alone, desire turns into punishment, and life becomes a senseless struggle. But it doesn't have to be that way. Life does not require suffering as a condition for existence. That's what you were taught. Now, it's possible to teach yourself something new. There is a part of you that never had space. The one that felt too much, wanted too much, was spontaneous, intense, real. The one that cried loudly, got excited without fear, spoke with a spark in her eyes, and at some point, she was silenced. Carl Jung called this the shadow, and it doesn't just hold what's ugly or unwanted. It holds what is yours, but was rejected. It holds the talents no one validated, the ideas they laughed at when you shared them, the courage that was dismissed as recklessness. It holds the self-love they called selfishness, the strength they mistook for arrogance, the creativity that got buried under rules. Everything that was denied still exists. It's just hidden. And what hides doesn't disappear. It simply transforms into constant sadness, into anger with no cause, into patterns that repeat, into self-sabotage that makes no sense. The war you feel inside is often exactly that. The shadow trying to be seen, not as an enemy, but as a legitimate part of who you are. Suffering isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that something is still alive, still trying to take up space. You are not just light. You also feel fear, contradict yourself, make mistakes. But you also dream, create, and long for things you haven't yet had the courage to live. Denying any one of those parts only takes you further from yourself. Healing isn't about eliminating the parts you don't like. It's about recognizing everything that's been silenced, including the best parts. Because the shadow doesn't want to destroy, it wants to exist. Jung didn't propose perfection. He proposed wholeness. And maybe that's exactly what you've been seeking without realizing it. To feel whole. To stop running from yourself. To look inward with courage. Not to fight, but to understand. The will to change exists. The desire to break this cycle is there too. But there's always a reason to wait a little longer. It's not the right time. It's risky. It might go wrong. Or worse. It might not be that bad. And just like that, the prison is no longer made of chains, but of internal justifications repeated until they feel like truth. A system of excuses was built to protect you from the unknown. And they've become so well rehearsed that you don't even notice when you're choosing to stay the same. Today's cell has the key on the inside, but stepping out requires the courage to face the consequences of freedom. Schopenhauer said the human mind creates illusions to bear the weight of living. And those illusions can feel so real that we choose to stay in pain, rather than risk the lightness we've never known. Excessive rationalizing, constant questioning, self-doubt, all of it often serves fear. While you think, plan, and evaluate, life passes by. The most painful realization is that there's no one else in your way anymore. The only voice still saying no is your own. And as hard as that is to accept, it's also freeing. Because if you're the one holding on, then you're the one who can let go. Change doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins in the quiet of your excuses, and in the silent courage it takes to say, enough. For so long, everything became a reaction. To criticism, to the past, to frustration. Everything sparked an immediate response. But that gets exhausting. Living in constant defense mode drains all your energy. There is, however, another path. A quieter path, less visible, and that's what makes it so hard to notice. The path of self-mastery. Not the kind that suppresses, but the kind that observes. That notices when something hurts and chooses how to respond, instead of reacting on impulse. Schopenhauer saw clarity as the only antidote to blind will. And clarity requires attention. It requires stepping out of the role of emotional victim and stepping into the role of the observer. The one who understands and chooses. This doesn't harden you. It frees you. Because you still feel. But you're no longer a slave to what you feel. You start to choose your battles, to reject old patterns, to stop destructive thoughts that once felt automatic. It's a subtle shift, but it changes everything. Where there was war, strategy is born. Where there was pain, space begins to open. Self-mastery isn't forced control. It's presence. It's the courage to remain with yourself, even when everything around you invites you to abandon who you are. The fight never really stopped. Against anxiety, against your thoughts, against the past. And while all of that was happening, time kept moving. The days stacked up, the years passed, and that same internal point remained untouched. Dreams were postponed. Relationships were never lived. Opportunities were turned down, all in the name of an inner war that took up too much space. You learned how to survive, but did you ever learn how to live? How many times have you delayed what you wanted, waiting to feel healed? Waiting to feel ready? Waiting for the perfect conditions? Now you look back and realize, life didn't wait. It moved on. Schopenhauer said time slips away with no return, and time has no compassion for pain. It passes. Even when we're standing still. That's the urgency. Not for speed, but for presence. Life is happening now. And if you keep fighting without stopping to breathe, you might reach the end with the feeling that you never really lived. Don't let pain become your only story, because beneath it, there are still desires. There is still beauty. There is still time. The war begins to end when you stop fighting what you feel. When pain is finally listened to, without judgment. Without being erased, defeated, or ignored, just heard. And in that silence, something begins to transform. You start to see that the inner enemy never wanted to destroy anything. It just wanted to be seen. The anger, the fear, the sadness. They're parts of you asking for compassion. They only screamed because they were ignored for too long. True freedom isn't about silencing the mind. It's about learning how to walk with it. Making peace with the forgotten parts of you. Stopping the habit of treating yourself like a problem and starting to see yourself as someone still being built. Schopenhauer saw suffering as part of existence, but he also pointed to awareness as a gateway to another way of living. And that door is open now. It's not about defeating pain, it's about walking through it with presence, listening to what it came to teach. Because the one who has faced their own shadow, who has survived their own chaos, no longer fears the world. You are not depressed, you are facing yourself. Maybe it's time to truly get to know who you are, through traditional therapy, holistic healing, through writing, through books that speak to your soul. Start wherever you can. Start, for example, with my favorite book, The Alchemist, or explore my ebook, linked in the first pinned comment.